The Parker family was thrilled for their summer road trip. They'd been planning this getaway for months, dreaming of a peaceful week away from their hectic lives. Steve, Rachel, Emily, and Jake were ready for their cabin in the mountains, far from the constant buzz of the city. As the miles slipped by, so did the familiar sights. Urban sprawl gave way to open countryside, and the highway grew quieter, narrower. The evening sky was painted in rich oranges and purples as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The kids bickered over who would get the best seat in the back, while Steve and Rachel shared knowing glances. Nothing was more family than this. But as they wound their way around an especially tight curve, something caught Steve's attention. "Did you see that?" he muttered, eyes narrowing as he slowed the van. The sign, new but old at the same time, "Welcome to Hollow Creek," was written in crooked letters on a wooden post, half hidden by the overgrown trees. No other signs or landmarks could be seen, just trees stretching into a vast darkness. "That's not on the map," Rachel said, glancing at the GPS. She pressed the screen a few times, but it just showed a blank space. "This isn't the route." Steve gripped the wheel tighter. "Maybe it's a detour or a shortcut. Let's just take it. Could save us some time." Rachel was hesitant, but Steve was already pulling into the unfamiliar road. The dense forest closed in around them, the trees lining the road so thick it almost felt like they were driving through a tunnel. The air inside the van grew heavier, cooler, though the outside temperature had. The road was uneven, cracked, and neglected, twisting in strange ways that seemed to defy logic. The kids grew quiet, glancing out the windows. Even Emily, who usually loved the adventure of new places, couldn't shake the strange feeling creeping down her spine. Minutes turned into an hour, but there was no sign of any other vehicles, no familiar landmarks. Only the occasional flicker of broken streetlights that barely illuminated the path ahead. "Mom, I don't like this," Jake murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't either," Emily added, hugging her knees to her chest. "Can we just turn back?" But just as Rachel was about to suggest turning around, they saw it. A dilapidated gas station up ahead, the flickering neon sign reading, "Hollow Creek Gas." The sight should have been a relief, but something about the station felt wrong. The lights buzzed in an erratic pattern, and the station's faded paint made it appear as though it had been abandoned for decades. "There it is," Steve said, his voice uncertain. "Let's stop, we need fuel." But as they pulled into the gravel parking lot, a sense of unease began to settle over them like an oppressive weight. Steve was the first to get out, but as he approached the old pumps, he paused. There was no sound, no chirping of crickets, no rustling of trees, just dead silence. Rachel turned to Emily and Jake in the back seat. "Stay in the van, okay? I'll just go pay." The kids nodded but didn't. Rachel stepped out, but before she could reach the door, she heard something strange. A soft humming sound, like something far off, but wrong. It wasn't the usual sound of nature or distant traffic. She hesitated, but then forced herself to take another step toward the station. Something inside her said she needed to push through the discomfort. As she reached the door to the convenience store, a bell rang, though it sounded distorted, like it was being stretched, an unsettling elongation of the sound. Inside the store, the air was damp and musty. The shelves were filled with odd items, things that didn't belong. Large, antique jars of fruit, strange canned goods labeled with symbols that didn't match any language Rachel recognized. The further she walked inside, the more the air seemed to thicken, as though it was filled with something unspeakable. Then she saw it, a portrait hanging on the far wall. A family, but not like any family she'd ever seen. Their eyes were wide open, too wide, staring at her in an almost painful way. Their features were twisted in a way that suggested something more sinister than just a posed photo. It was like they were alive, staring into her soul. Rachel recoiled, her breath catching in her throat. Her mind screamed at her to leave, but before she could turn around, she heard a voice from behind her. "Mom, is everything okay?" It was Emily's voice, soft, but full of fear. Rachel spun around, startled, and for a moment, she thought she saw Emily standing in the doorway. But then she blinked, and the door with panic gripped her chest. "Kids," she called out, but no one answered. The store fell silent again, as if the world itself had held its breath. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her, and the lights flickered erratically. Rachel's heart raced as she pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The silence around her deepened, and the temperature in the store plummeted. Outside, she saw Steve. He was frozen, staring into the woods as though entranced. A deep, low hum filled the air, resonating in her chest. That's when Rachel knew something was terribly wrong. She needed to get to the van, get her kids, and leave now. But when she turned to run, she found the door wasn't there anymore. The walls of the store seemed to stretch and warp, growing longer, taller, as if it were alive and changing shape. The floor beneath her feet seemed to move, twisting, making her stumble. Mom Emily's voice was there again, but it didn't come from anywhere she could place. It seemed to echo from all around. Outside, she saw the kids, now standing near the van, their faces frozen in terror. But behind them, something shifted in the trees. Figures just beyond the edge of the clearing, watching, their bodies contorted in unnatural ways. Their faces were grotesque, mouths stretched wide, some smiling in a way that made Rachel's blood run cold. The figures moved slowly, gliding toward the children. Rachel ran, but her feet felt heavy, like she was wading through something thick and suffocating. She screamed for her kids to get inside the van, but her voice was drowned out by a new sound, a long guttural hum that shook the very ground. She finally reached the van, but it was too late. The doors were locked, the windows rolled up, and inside, Emily and Jake were staring blankly ahead, their eyes vacant. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. And then the van disappeared. The road, the gas station, the figures in the trees, everything was gone. The world around her was dark, empty, and in the distance, she could still hear the hum, a sound that seemed to grow louder. Rachel's world had become part of Hollow Creek, and there was no turning back. Now the road ahead was endless. It was Last Mile, the one that led nowhere.